Number 1.
On June 15, 1992, 21-year-old Carolyn Love went to work at the Bojangles on Central Avenue. She asked her manager if she could buy quarters to do laundry after her shift ended. The manager agreed and Carolyn began her walk home. On her walk home, she ran into her cousin Robert. He offered to drive her home. Her cousin watched her enter the apartment. But after she entered her home, she seemed to disappear. Just a few days after, her sister Kathy, roommate Sadie, and her roommate's boyfriend Henry filed a missing persons report. Wallace confessed to killing Carolyn Love when he was captured. 20-year-old Chynna Hawk was studying to be a paralegal at Central Piedmont Community College. She was known by family and friends as the Purple Princess because of her favorite color. She lived with her mother Dee and worked at the Taco Bell on Sharon Amity Road. On February 19, 1993, Chynna's mother arrived home and began to cook dinner. When she got to the house, Chynna's car wasn't there. While Dee was cooking dinner, she noticed Chynna's purse and coat. Chynna never went anywhere without her purse. Dee had seen Chynna in the coat earlier that day, and it was a cold day, the highs being 41 degrees and lows into the 20s. Concerned, Dee reached out to Chynna's boyfriend, Daryl. Daryl said he hadn't seen Chynna. Daryl came over. They called the police to report her missing. Then Daryl searched the house. He made it to the downstairs bathroom. The shower curtain was outside the bathtub. He pulled the curtain back. Inside was Chynna's body curled up and submerged underwater. Wallace also confessed to killing Chynna once captured. 24-year-old Audrey Spain was living in Charlotte and working at a Taco Bell in June of 1993. However, on June 23, Audrey didn't show up for her shift. It was very unlike her, she didn't miss work. It was so out of the ordinary that her manager Mark actually drove by her apartment that night. Her car was parked there. So he tried calling her and left her a message. That evening, Audrey was supposed to pick up another shift. Again she didn't show. Mark decided to call 911. Officers rode to the apartment, but no one answered when they knocked. On the 25th of June, maintenance workers needed to enter Audrey's apartment. They entered through the sliding glass door. Once inside they discovered Audrey's body on the bed. A ligature had been made from a t-shirt and bra. Part of the t-shirt was stuffed inside Audrey's mouth. There were also small abrasions on her back, face, and knee. Above her right hip was also a small contusion. There was evidence of sexual assault. Wallace again confessed to this crime. 21-year-old Valencia Jumper was in her final year at Johnson C. Smith studying political science. She worked at the Food Lion on Central Avenue near the Bojangles Carolyn Love worked. And she also worked at Hecht's in South Park Mall. On August 9, she'd made plans to get together with her friend Zach after work. Zach arrived after midnight to Valencia's place. He could see smoke billowing out of the apartment. Once in the kitchen, firefighter Dennis Arney saw a burner left on the stove. There was a pot of beans on the burner. As the firefighters made their way through the apartment, they discovered Valencia's body in her bedroom. Her body was charred from the fire. According to Wallace's confession, he strangled Valencia and then poured rum on her body, bed, and floor. He started the beans on the stove and then struck a match in Valencia's room. 20-year-old Michelle Stinson was a mother of 2 young boys. They lived in an apartment in the Charlotte area. She was attending college classes and had worked at a local Taco Bell. On September 15, Michelle's friend James stopped by to visit. He knocked on the door, but no one answered. He could hear noises inside though. The 2 young boys were knocking on the window. When James came into the apartment, he saw his friend on the kitchen floor in a pool of blood. He picked up the phone to call 911, but quickly realized the cord had been cut. He took the children to a neighbor's and called 911. Michelle had been stabbed 4 times in the left side of her back. 2 of the wounds had caused injuries to her heart and lungs. Around her neck were bands indicating strangulation, along with contusions on the front of her neck. Her cause of death was due to stab wounds with strangulation as a contributing factor. Wallace confessed when he was captured. In February 1994, 25-year-old Vanessa Mack was working at Carolina's Medical Center and raising her 2 daughters, a 7-year-old and a 4-month-old. She was also close with her sister who worked at a local Taco Bell in the Charlotte area. Sunday, February 20th, Barbara Rippey went to Vanessa's apartment to pick up Vanessa's youngest daughter. It was their routine. Barbara arrived at 6 a.m. Barbara went inside. The first person she saw was Vanessa's 4-month-old daughter. She was lying on the couch, which was an unusual thing for Vanessa to allow. Barbara made her way through the home. When she reached Vanessa's room, she saw her feet hanging over the bed. She described them as gray and cold and the only visible part of Vanessa. She called 911. Barbara quickly grabbed the baby and waited outside for law enforcement. The Charlotte-Mecklenburg Police Department arrived on scene. A towel combined with a long-sleeved shirt was wrapped around her neck. There was blood coming from her nose, ears and the back of her head. She had been strangled. Next to her, her purse and its contents were strewn on the bed. Wallace confessed to Vanessa's murder. Investigators also had a picture from an ATM where he tried to use her debit card. 24-year-old Betty Susie Baucom was the assistant manager at the Bojangles on Central Avenue. She had only lived in the Charlotte area less than a year. She moved there with her 3-year-old adopted daughter and they lived at the Lake Apartments. On March 9, Susie didn't show up for her shift. Her manager called her, but got no response. He also called co-workers and her mother, but no one had heard from her. On March 10, Susie didn't show up for the next shift she was scheduled for. Her manager became even more concerned. After making another round of calls, the manager and another co-worker drove to her apartment. They knocked on the door and looked in the windows. There was no answer, but everything looked normal inside. Even with everything appearing normal, the manager and Susie's mom called the police to file a missing persons report. An hour after that call, police contacted Susie's manager at the Bojangles. They had been dispatched to an apartment where a woman wasn't breathing. Maintenance had entered the apartment. Inside they discovered Susie on her bed. A towel partnered with a small sheet or pillowcase wrapped around her neck. She also had abrasions on her left shoulder, right upper chest, abdomen and right forehead. Even with these other injuries, her cause of death was strangulation. Items from her apartment were missing, but the biggest one was her car. Wallace confessed to Susie's murder. He also left a palm print on her car. 18-year-old Brandy Henderson lived with her boyfriend Vernis Lamar Woods and 10-month-old son. Brandy left the apartment to go to a doctor's appointment on March 9. Her boyfriend was taking care of their son, and his friend Henry Wallace stopped by. Henry stayed just a few moments and told Woods he was leaving town. Woods left for work around 5 p.m. and got home around midnight. The home he returned to wasn't the one he'd left. The door was unlocked. The living room was a disaster with things thrown everywhere and the stereo missing. Woods carefully made his way through the apartment, checking on his son first. He turned on the light to the room. What he saw was every father's worst nightmare. His son was gasping for air. There was something white coming out of his mouth, and a pair of shorts were wrapped around his neck. He ran to help his son, removing the shorts. Then he saw Brandy. She was lying face down on the bed. Woods rolled her over. Towels were tied around her neck, her face was blue. He removed the towels. He then called 911. He performed CPR until law enforcement arrived. Brandy was dead, but their son was sent to the hospital. He survived. On March 12, Lovie Slaughter went by her daughter Deborah's apartment. She wasn't alarmed when 35-year-old Deborah didn't answer. She was supposed to be at work. But when she put the key in the door, she realized the door was already unlocked. Right when she entered Deborah's apartment, she saw her daughter lying on the floor in a pool of blood. She called 911. When law enforcement arrived, they noted Deborah's purse and the items inside were thrown everywhere. Deborah was lying fasoup on the floor. A white balled-up sock was stuffed in her mouth, and 2 towels were tied around her neck. She had been stabbed 38 times in the chest and abdomen. Her cause of death was stab wounds with strangulation as a factor. Wallace confessed to this murder as well. In his confession, he admitted to using the victim's own knife, wiping it down, and leaving it with the contents of her purse.
Number 2.
On July 24, 2006, Blake Dickus was finishing up a week spent with his dad Sean and stepmother Chynna. His mother Christina had planned an evening at the movies. Chynna had arranged a later pickup time so Blake could have lunch with dad. Sean arrived at their month-old home on Aberdeen Drive at 12:45 p.m. to have lunch. He left the house at 1:45 p.m. After he left, someone else entered the home. Christina and her mother were unable to reach Chynna and pick up Blake. Sean arrived home from work at 5:14 p.m. The kitchen door to the garage was open, which is something Chynna occasionally did. Once inside the house, he discovered Blake and Chynna murdered. He called the Franklin Police Department. Once law enforcement arrived, they began to investigate the scene. They find no sign of forced entry. Chynna and Blake were found just feet apart from one another. Chynna had been stabbed multiple times. Blake was stabbed, but he also had blunt force trauma and had been asphyxiated as well. When the police arrived, they found Chynna and Blake only feet from each other. Chynna had been stabbed multiple times, but it appeared Blake had suffered the worst of it. Not only had Blake been stabbed, but he had also suffered from blunt force trauma and had been asphyxiated. The police found no signs of forced entry, and their primary suspect quickly became Sean. He was the last person to see his wife and son alive only a few hours prior to discovering their bodies. However, after extensive questioning and a passing polygraph test, the police were able to clear Sean as a suspect. The police started to consider another angle. The neighborhood had experienced a series of burglaries in recent months. There had also been a break-in on the day of the murder on the same street the Dickus family lived on. While only minor items, such as coins, food, and jewelry, were usually taken, the police considered that the murders and the burglaries might be related. The police also considered the possibility that a murderer was lurking among the many construction workers in the area. A multitude of new home construction was being built in the area, which allowed people who usually wouldn't be in the area to blend in easily. Ultimately, neither theory panned out with the investigation, and the police were left empty-handed. Authorities were left without any suspects or motives. However, quite a bit of evidence was left behind at the scene. The police have planned to have the evidence retested as science evolves and forensic testing becomes more advanced. The police have no intention of giving up on the case until they have a resolution. They have received hundreds of tips and leads in Chynna and Blake's case, and the police have vowed to follow up on them until the person who killed them is arrested for the crime. Present-day Christina Dickus is still searching for answers. She wants to know who murdered her son and his stepmother, and she wants to see justice served. Christina wants the person who did this off the streets so that another family doesn't have to suffer in the same way she has had to hurt. If you have any information regarding Chynna and Blake Dickus's murders, please don't hesitate to contact the Franklin Police Department at 317 346 1142, or you may call anonymously at 317 346 1100. There may be a $25,000 reward for information leading to the arrest and conviction of the Dickus family murderer.
Number 3.
On May 1, 2003, 32-year-old Heidi Newman woke up and spent the early morning with her boyfriend Martin before he left for work at 6 a.m. Around 5:30 a.m., Martin's co-worker, who he commutes to work with, arrived at the house, along with another friend. This other friend hadn't shown up for years but had started dropping by unannounced in the last month and a half. Martin and his co-worker left for work around 6 a.m., but the other friend stuck around. Martin or Heidi thought he'd stay long because Heidi had errands to run. Heidi normally called Martin during the day, but he didn't hear from her that day. Martin arrived home to the 200 East 16th Street house at 3:40 p.m. He walked inside and set down his lunch pail. Then he went back to the master bedroom. Once he opened the door, he found Heidi. He could see she'd been tied up and was no longer alive. She was face down on the waterbed, and he could see a cord around her neck. She was wearing her brown sweatpants and white shirt, meaning she had never gotten dressed to leave the house. Her hands were bound behind her back with an appliance cord and plastic fasteners, her legs bound with plastic fasteners or zip ties. On the ground was an empty gun holster and a bundle of zip ties. Also on the ground was a white portable heater. The cord was wrapped around her hands, then ran up her back to her neck. It was wrapped around her neck. She had been strangled with the cord. There was bruising present on her shoulders and a contusion on her head. Her body showed no definitive signs of sexual assault, and no semen was present. The friend that was left with Heidi was a man named Matthew Kroll. Police began looking for him. When they found him, he was on his bike, and on his person was the gun from the empty holster in Heidi's bedroom. Police interviewed Kroll, who denied killing Heidi. But they searched his vehicle and home. They found gloves that matched a piece of evidence from Heidi's crime. Inside the zip ties binding her hands was a piece of rubber with DNA from a pair of the same gloves. Law enforcement also noted the similarities to Heidi's case and one 6 years earlier. In 1997, Linda Lincoln had been having problems with an estranged boyfriend. Linda had gotten a restraining order for a domestic violence incident in which she described him choking her. She had found support through one of the boyfriend's friends, Matthew Kroll. Matthew had helped her change the locks to her home to feel safer. But in March of 1997, someone got past the new locks. On March 5 at 3:25 p.m., police visited her home after her father hadn't been able to reach her for several days. Linda's body was located in her bedroom. She had been hogtied with nylon stockings. One was wrapped around her neck. Her cause of death was manual strangulation. Linda was also completely dressed and showed no signs of sexual assault. While police were still investigating Kroll's involvement with Heidi's and Linda's murder, Matthew Kroll went on the run for about a month. After he was located, he was charged with Heidi's murder. He pleaded no contest to the murder in 2006. He was sentenced to 15 years to life with the possibility of parole. He has been denied parole twice so far. Matthew Kroll has not been charged with Linda Lincoln's murder.
Number 4.
On the morning of November 28, 1998, 34-year-old Rita had been with her best friend, Brenda Wynn. The two played racquetball and had made plans to watch figure skating the next day. Rita left Brenda's at noon. At 4 p.m., Rita called another friend to say she was going to the Silhouette Lounge and asked the friend to come along. The bar was just around the corner from her Parkvale Avenue apartment in the Alston neighborhood. Rita had actually been there the previous night. The friend was supposed to meet up with Rita around 7 p.m. at her apartment. But 48 minutes earlier a 911 call was placed. At 6:12 p.m. law enforcement received a call about a fight inside Rita's apartment. It took 7 minutes for officers to be dispatched. When they entered her apartment, Rita was still alive. She was on the floor and had been stabbed multiple times. Somehow she managed to cling to life until the authorities arrived. The offender had stabbed Rita 20 times in the chest. Between the call at 6:12 to the time she reached Beth Israel Hospital, over an hour had gone by. Rita passed away at the hospital from cardiac arrest due to her injuries. No arrest has ever been made in Rita's case. On June 9, Rhea Milton was shot several times in Liberty Falls, Ohio in June. Rhea was murdered during a robbery, and 2 people have been arrested. The day before, the remains of Dominique Remy Fells were found in Philadelphia. Both cases saw their respective law enforcements misgender and deadname them. Dominique's remains were located floating in the water at Bartram's Garden Dock and Community Boathouse. She had been stabbed multiple times and her legs were severed. The suspected murderer is named Akhenaton Jones. The police have an arrest warrant for him, but do not believe in the city of Philadelphia. He has still not been located. On June 30, 22-year-old Marcy Mack was shot in the parking lot of an apartment building in Dallas. No suspect has been identified. There is also 17-year-old Brayla Stone from North Little Rock, Arkansas. Brayla's body was discovered inside a vehicle on a walking path in Sherwood, Arkansas on June 25. Since recording, Trevor Miller has been arrested for capital murder in Brayla's case. On July 1, 32-year-old Shaky Peters was slain in Amite City, Louisiana. On July 3, 27-year-old Bree Black was found shot in Pompano Beach, Florida. There isn't much to go on in the media for either case. Although law enforcement has said they have a person of interest for Shaky's case. There is another case out of Louisiana, but it hasn't been ruled a homicide. Over July 4 weekend, the body of Drya McCarty was discovered in Baton Rouge. Law enforcement has released no details on the case.